Oh, there we go. Terrific. All right, let me get this up. All right, hello and welcome to TrishRockTV, interviews with people on purpose, loving life. Tonight's guest is Kathryn Heggarty. Kathryn is the founder of Your Career Position, a new career coaching, resume, LinkedIn and consulting business. She is educating and assisting executives and the unemployed to rediscover their skills, passions, and forge a career path beyond COVID-19 and the awakening which is happening culturally within Australia and the world. The wisdom that Kathryn gives to others is due to her own experience having to complete various career transitions due to health, income, and family reasons. Kathryn says the more flexible a person is, the more adaptable they are for success. So we've got a lot to talk about. So let's welcome you to the show, Kathryn.
Hello everyone. Yes, thank you, Trish, for letting me come on and get to know you and sort of what you do and bring the message out to the world as well. So that's good.
Absolutely, and you know, the passion that you've got for the career that you're going to be talking about here tonight is really great. And it's interesting that, you know, we go through things in our life, but we don't always know until years later why we went through them. So let's start with you and a little bit about your background and your history.
Yeah, so I'll just sort of tell you my initial reaction when March hit this year in 2020, because it was a real, like, I got memories started to surface, and that helped me adapt. And so it was February in 2010 that I ended up very stressed from an advertising executive role, and I ended up burnt out, and I ended up on the Gold Coast. And I've written about this in a book with Pat Massetti, a Strong Women in Tough Times. It's not something that I talk about anymore, but yeah, I was like, oh yeah, because you sometimes grow through different experiences, and then you move forward and you move forward teaching other things. So I reinvented myself as an assistant nurse, and I've been an assistant nurse for 10 years in community, residential, aged care facilities and agency work. So yeah, but when it come down to March, obviously I was still in demand having a skill set as an assistant nurse. But there was one memory in particular that assisted me just get over my own initial fear, because the world was starting to just go a bit crazy. And I could see people's reactions and the leadership start to shift. And even leaders were having a difficult time trying to combat all the information in the media, because it was, for a certain period there, was really quite negative, and just like day 1 negative, day 2 negative, day 3 negative. And you know, your mental health eventually comes to a point when it can't take in that sort of stuff anymore.
It was pretty bad the first. Well, actually, it's bad now, depending on who you talk to. But I think everyone was a little bit shell shocked in those first 6 weeks.
yeah. So there was one exercise that, as an assistant nurse, you get taught about infection control and the hand washing techniques. But every 12 months you get tested on this. So yeah, there's a gel that you can put on your hands, and you put your hands under an ultraviolet light, and it shows up the germs that are left on your hands. So if you're continuously reiterated how to wash your hands and then go through that test, it really makes you aware of your hand washing technique. And I got reminded of this back in March, because I was like, okay, I could still do with doing the shifts, but you know, other people's fear was coming onto me, and then it was my own fear as well. But yeah, that particular memory, and it was just like, Kathryn, believe in your skill set, believe in the journey that you've already taken, and the wisdom that I've created from recuperating through my own health and my own career transition. So it's a big jump from advertising executive to an assistant nurse. And that was sort of the main content that I sort of wanted to discuss today, because I see a lot of executives, a lot of managers, and they're sort of just in a holding pattern at the moment, because they are well educated, they're used to a certain amount of lifestyle, and so some of them are, you know, on that JobKeeper scheme, which is great, but it's also about adapting and realizing that the whole society has sort of changed, in my view.
Absolutely. And so you, back in March, April, you decided to help people with that knowledge that you had of transitioning career, and you now help people with perhaps moving into a different job or career. You help them with resumes.
That's correct. Yeah. So depending on where that person is at, and sort of at what skill set they're at too. So someone you know, that is doing labour work, that's a different conversation, because there are strategies out there. So for instance, Gumtree is a different approach, but it's a more direct approach. Okay.
And you know, there's just talking about Gumtree. I mean, I have over the years, when I've been looking for work, I've looked on Gumtree, and it doesn't seem to be in a lot of people's awareness. But there's definitely jobs on there and work on there. So are people surprised when you direct them there?
A little bit, but then it's just another conversation, and you say, okay, especially with labour work, because what actually happens with labour work is the actual process of getting that sort of work is that it's trial and error. So a company owner will give you a trial basis for a week or 2 weeks and see how you fit in, whether you got that actually practical skill, you can handle the physical labour, and the attitude as well. So what we're finding at the moment is it's about people's attitude. So you can sort of resign to the fact that things are happening that are out of your control, and you can wait and see, you know, the wait and see approach. Or you can say, I'm going to push through this storm, and I'm going to try and adapt and pivot and see what other things can eventuate. So when I'm sort of in that period, I look at what is known as supply and demand. Okay. So the whole COVID thing as well, it's like, what industries are going to be in demand? What jobs are going to be in demand? And where could I fit in that? Even if it's for the next 6-12 months, because if you're working in the next 6-12 months, that positions you, so in my view, in so much better position than other people who are just doing the wait and see approach.
And moving into a different area in that supply and demand chain, you know, people often don't, they underestimate their skills, and they underestimate how their skills can actually be repurposed, I guess, in a way, somewhere else.
That's correct. And just on that particular thing, probably the most interesting conversations, because it takes me out of my comfort zone to have these interesting, different conversations that I wouldn't be brave enough to have sometimes. But because of the what's happening, the cultural sort of things. Okay, so I'm having different conversations, and I'm seeing how that they react. So for someone that speaks more than one language, okay, they've gone through life here in Australia just realizing, oh yeah, that could be an added skill, but they've never actually, like you said, you just stated asset. They haven't actually understood that speaking French, Germany, you know, even Chinese can be seen as a total 100% asset to certain companies. So we've got a multicultural society. So I'm sort of now of the opinion that it doesn't matter how bad that stuff happens. Our history tells us that we have sorted the stuff out, you know, like our white Australian policy eradicated, you know, 1947. And, you know, I was proud to sort of, you know, the apology to the Aboriginals, you know, so change might be slow to some people, but change does eventually happen. You know, it may not happen on my timeline, but it happens.
It's always happening, isn't it? And I think you know, a lot of the the kind of words people have been saying recently is, we're very adaptable.
Yes.
And I think sometimes for some of us, we need to get pushed into that corner to actually do that. And I know with some of the clients I work with, they're working in a job or career that they just don't like anymore, but they keep going and keep going because it's easier than changing. But when you get pushed in that corner and it's like, oh, okay, I just got made redundant. Like, what a great time. Thank you, universe. Now I can go and do that thing that I love. But for so many people, they're in fear. And I just feel that your service that you provide them is not only just a practical kind of thing, but you've got the experience of saying, hey, well, I know how you feel. It can be scary, but let's see what you've got and what's out there, and let's match you up. I think it's a really well needed service right now. And as you've said, this is not going to just go away overnight. There's going to be openings for different work that people can adapt into, I feel.
That's correct. And I'm also an ambassador of an app called Work App, which is a Gold Coast app, but that allows me to think differently and worldwide as well. So it's a free platform for workers to create a free profile and then link with other work recruiters that list jobs as well. So this is where
we'll put the link up in the comments when we're finished, so people can find it. Yeah.
Because this is where I see it happening. Yes, you'll have the traditional jobs, the resume, the LinkedIn profile, the applicant tracking system, and then the interview, the phone interview screening, and then the first telephone. And I'm sort of just describing that as sort of the traditional way to get a job. But then there are the other alternatives like the gig economy, Gumtree, and what I'm finding is there's these platforms out there now which connect two markets together. So so that's what's happening with this work app platform. And also there's another one called AirTasker. So AirTasker is sort of known in the gig economy here in Australia. And so that can work if you know how to utilize the platforms for yourself.
Exactly. And LinkedIn is a really great avenue as well, as you mentioned in your bio. And actually, when you were speaking before about the multiculturals, a job came up today on LinkedIn actually for translators. I'm like, oh, okay. Surely there's people, a lot of people who could go for that one. So the jobs are out there. So really.
Actually on that LinkedIn, because I get sometimes the notifications, and there was an article about the #1 top position that's going to be in demand in the recruitment area is people like head of diversity, head of recruiting diversity channels. And when I look at the USA and what's happening there in the recruitment sphere, there is a lot of companies that have shifted, and that's what they're searching for now, people with some sort of diverse background to help them adapt and help them come to terms with all these massive changes.
Absolutely, because people can go into that crisis mode and an inability to cope, and there's also apart from the jobs being a bit funny, there's the financial and the health crisis as well. So to overcome that grief, I guess that's really something, and that sense of self, right? That's really something you can relate to as well, because you've had that.
Definitely. So there was a period there when I've got a science background, and you sort of go along one career path for many years, and then something happened. So in my instance, it was a health crisis. But what's happening with people, there's many people at the moment, they could be suffering a health crisis, or they could be suffering, with mental health. They could be suffering a financial crisis, unable to pay the rent, and really struggling with, just putting food on the table. So when there's normally one massive change, people do have a normal coping mechanism. that kicks in. But when sort of one struggle happens after another struggle, that's when, yeah, like you mentioned, you can go into what is known as a crisis. And that's sort of what I saw happening to our general population. On a bigger scale. Like I personally had a health crisis 10 years ago. And part of my identity was attached to the role of an advertising executive. So that meant I, wore a suit, I looked after myself, I took clients to their coffee shop to meet face to face. And I remember grieving that habit that I had, which was, going to the coffee club, reading the paper, meeting people face to face, because suddenly when you don't have income, that $3.50 for the cappuccino becomes suddenly expensive.
But the whole identity thing is the issue too for a lot of people. If they've had that executive corporate role and now they don't, a lot of people, when they have that identity, that's who they are. And without that identity, that really kicks off a whole new crisis for them. Do you have any advice for, how can people not lose hope that things will get better?
What was just coming to me, how like large musicians like Madonna and Lady Gaga and that, they create a stage presence and they create a different identity for the stage or for a different song. And that's really what I did. Yes, I've got an identity in advertising executive, but then I started to shift and become an assistant nurse, which is, you learn about compassion, understanding, patience. And then I wasn't one or the other, I had to bring it all together because respecting both experiences. So what could someone do not to lose hope? It's just really about progressing. So keeping yourself busy, and not busy like for busy's sake, but you could learn a new skill. You could do a certificate. There's TAFE courses out there which are free at the moment, and that's a good thing, because when I was low, I ended up doing a certificate at the level 2 stage, which was the level 2 in community services. And I really haven't utilized that to the full extent in a community, but it helped bring purpose back into my life, the daily routine of getting up, getting dressed and going and doing some study.
Exactly. And, especially for the people in Melbourne now who are still in lockdown, I mean, why not use the time productively to learn something?
Yes. Because I mean, yes, you could be twiddling your thumbs, frustrated by what's all on social media, but sort of, turn the social media off sometimes and, tune into leaders like yourself, which is a different sort of leadership, different sort of content. And, it can be inspiring to hear people's stories and how they bounce back. And that too can motivate you going forward.
Absolutely, because everybody's got the ability to empower themselves to move forward and not be a victim of circumstance. And I think that's it's not easy, but it's possible. It's possible. Yes. And so we spoke a little bit about the cultural awakening, but what's happening with the recruitment after these massive changes with COVID-19? Do you think that that will? We've touched on it a little bit, but do you think the actual recruitment companies right now, they're going to need to shift as well?
Yes, there's something I am married to an Indian national and I've sponsored him. So I've had that experience as well. And there's something called cultural competence. So in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, there is sphere, there is Cultural Competence Australia. And what that means is for healthcare individuals that deal in that sort of area, community, Aboriginal, Torres Strait, they learn about this cultural competence. And it wasn't until I went searching for it that I actually found it. But as soon as I understood it, it's sort of understanding the culture at a deeper level, so that it's not about one culture against another. It's trying to gel the two cultures together so that so each one can understand where the other person is coming from. So with Aboriginal, they use stories and that. And being aware of the Indian Australian community, I sort of feel it's still very early days, but the idea popped into my head that, you know, there should be policies and an understanding of cultural competence for different subsets of the cultures. So for Torres Strait Islanders, cultural competence, for the Indian Australian community, some cultural competence, because there have been some things that have happened, you know, with our leaders, and just a simple understanding of the cultural competence or context, they would understand that particular subculture within Australia as well, and limit, you know, the disharmony that may sometimes happen just simply because of some miscommunication, or because it's been worded incorrectly. So that's the sort of a standard that I see slowly emerging. But yeah, when I do talk to people, it's not something that is in the realm or talked about.
No, well, you might be the leader on that front, and, you know, bring that into your company, and, you know, it will become a norm, right?
So that's what I mean. So I see with the COVID, the new norm would be to have that COVID plan, but also an understanding of the hand washing. And then with the cultural awakening that you've mentioned, a policy where cultural competence assists with multiculturalism and the diversity recruitment. So if a large company wants to, you know, employ people of multicultural backgrounds, then there's this policy to ensure that everyone gets along very well.
And I guess you know, that is highlighting some of the future trends, that, and they're not really trends, they'll be norms as we go forward. So, you know, there's obviously positives about these changes as well, and people struggling with their career at this stage. And we did just touch on that briefly, but, you know, I just kind of feel, if you know, the more we can get the message out there that there's always hope. It's not really a word I want to use. It's not really the right word, but there's always a new perspective, isn't there? There's always a new way of looking at things, and that I think has been one of the biggest changes for many people, especially if they've been in the same career, you know, since they've left school or whatever it is, for a long period of time, never even having to think that they would ever have to look outside of that. And so once the shock of that kind of wears off, you know, maybe it's the best thing that ever happens to them, and they find a career that they absolutely love, and it turns into be their passion, and they look back in 5 years' time and think, wow, that was the best thing that ever happened. I mean, you know, it's good just to try to have that different perspective, rather than feeling, oh, this is the end for me.
So some of the news reports with the statistics and the unemployment statistics, to me, can get quite depressing, you know. So month in, month out, and yes, we understand that some shifts will happen and the unemployment rate will go higher, but yeah, if you just keep focused on your situation and how you're adapting, your level of awareness, and there are those transferable skills. So one career so with advertising executive positions, you use the sales cycle, and you read people's body positions and verbal cues in a sales context. But lo and behold, as an assistant nurse, you actually do the same thing. You're reading like the verbal cues from an elderly patient, how they stand up, and how they are they wincing, are they in pain, or, you know, and sometimes they might be angry, but the real reason that they're angry is because they're frustrated, and they haven't got their independence like they love, you know, so they're missing that sort of stuff. But it's really the one skill. It's an ability to read someone's verbal cues and understand the real message behind that cue. So that's what I found interesting in my career transition. So you are becoming an expert in not actually the label of a job, but actually a skill. So, you know, like through my career, there are certain skills about resilience, about being aware of my communication that I talk to myself, you know, and how to bounce back. So like, if I feel, you know, everyone's going to have a bad day, but I've got strategies that when I have a bad day, I go and do, you know. So simple strategies of like today, I picked a red top because it was like, okay, I want to be confident, I want to be happy on screen.
And that's the empowerment in the moment, isn't it?
It is.
It all comes down to, well, how can I feel better right now? What can I do now?
Yes.
It's getting out of all the worry from the past or the fear of the future. And you know, you look at things and you can say, yes, well, things are real. I'm not telling you a lie. Things are bad right now, right? Blah, blah, blah. And you can be in that story, or you can say, okay, what can I do right now? And as you said, just little things like the color, or, you know, meditating, or going out into nature, or just doing something that brings you joy, researching something online, learning something, reading all those books on your shelf like I've got over here that I haven't read for a while. I think it's great.
So they're the sort of the activities that you can do. And I talked to someone today about picking a topic up and then putting it down. And so with the most difficult topics, and they could be really worrying to your mental health, and it could be hard to put that topic down because it's so far in your vision. You know, for instance, like income, you know, if you've got all these bills piling up, you know, you're worrying, and your constant thought is about, well, how can that income be? But if you sort of say, okay, for the next hour, I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to do something that will boost my energy, make me happy. And that when I come and pick it up in an hour's time, I'm going to find one solution, you know. And it just sort of shifts your attitude and your energy to a different perspective. So
absolutely. And energy is so important, and not everybody relates to energy, but your energy that you're putting out is actually what you're getting back. So, you know, if you are in that kind of energy of fear, or I'm never going to get a job, or everything's falling apart, if you're in that kind of lower vibration energy, then the opportunities won't present themselves to you. So to be in that energy is great. And let's just touch a little bit on the other forms of self-employment that people could find on Fiverr, on AirTasker. Upwork is a great one as well. I mean, you know, some of them, you know, you get on there and there's a lot of traffic and there's a lot of noise and everything else. So do you help people to firstly introduce them to those platforms so they know what they are, but do you help them set things up and you know, get their marketing and their advertising correct on those platforms so that they're seen?
I see that as a product that I can develop over time. At the moment, I'm sort of finding that I'm just educating people to utilize them, because it really depends on what income or what job they've got, and what strategy and how open they are to those sort of platforms. So sometimes it's about learning the platform. So there's this learning curve. So especially with AirTasker, you know, people have mixed experiences, and then some people have great experiences. So for me, I've got about 140 reviews on my personal one.
Oh, fantastic.
So but it can be a bit difficult to get your first 5 reviews, okay, just because people want to know exactly who you are and how good you're going to do a resume. But you know, it takes a while, and then you get your completion rate up. So that means not cancelling, and the job, the communication between the tasker and the poster works out. So it's more about understanding that the platforms and what jobs. So for the AirTasker platform, I started just doing cleaning jobs initially, and little garden jobs, and they're great for those because they're trade services. Then I moved more into article writing, blog writing, and the recruitment. sort of
That's
section.
fantastic. And I think, AirTasker's got a pretty good reputation. And I think, people are perhaps moving over to that for some of those articles and some of those type of tasks coming off Fiverr and off Upwork to do that. And also they get someone local.
That's correct.
So that if a lot of people still want to meet up face to face, don't they? Or they you really want to actually meet you and see if you're the right person.
That's correct. I mean, for me, it's about proving. So you've got an area there for your portfolio. So for graphic designers, they take pictures and upload works of their graphic design, and that it's like a social proof.
Yeah.
So instead of a resume, you're proving to individuals in a different format by the testimonials, the reviews, the completion rate, and the portfolio. So that's the same with the resumes. You can take pictures of, obviously due to privacy, not disclosing people's privacy, but you can take a picture in a format that gives some sort of sense of how I would do your resume.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. The times that I've used AirTasker, because I work with energy, I kind of just look at them and see if we're a match. But that hasn't been for anything like writing or anything. That's just been for moving or picking things up or whatever.
And every platform works a bit differently. So with the Fiverr platform, I've tested that out, and I've got a gig on there where I create people's business names and more of a branding task. But it was surprising, like in the worst time, I think it was April or May, when the race riots were happening, I suddenly got 2 orders from the USA. So it was really like motivating for me, because it was like, why am I getting the orders there? So this is what I mean about, you can set up a service or a product, put it out on a platform, and you can build your testimonials, your reviews, your portfolio, and you'll gather in clients worldwide.
And so it's really a great advice for people who are feeling at a bit of a loose end right now, because even if it's not their next 10-year career, over the next 6 months or 12 months, it could create some, regular clientele that are coming in, which then they could just do as a, if they want to get back into their career, they could just do that as a side hustle anyway, right? And get some extra money in.
Yeah, and that's how I came across the recruitment aspect. I did some blogs and some articles for someone, and then I face-to-face, and then like this time last year I did 7 months of a freelancing work from home opportunity for a recruitment person. So that's how I got the experience of being a recruitment. She was able to give me a go. So there are great companies and great family boutique businesses that are utilizing these platforms as well. And what they're searching for is someone that can do the skill, but be happy about doing it, and take on that responsibility and just tick it off for that business owner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there will be a lot of autonomous people out there, and a lot of driven people, and a lot of self-starters who would be absolutely fine to work at home, on a schedule, and be okay with that. So I just think it's fabulous, and I hope that people reach out to you. And, for anybody listening, or for everybody listening, if you know of somebody who really needs some direction forward in their career or job, or just finding it difficult with the skills that they currently have, or if they've never had to look for a job, if they've been in a career for such a long time, just to reach out to Kathryn, because she can really advise you and guide you onto the next steps. And I think, as we said during the interview, it's just getting a new perspective on it, isn't it? And feeling you know what, maybe there is something else. Maybe I don't need to just sit and wait and rely on somebody else to fix things, right? Maybe I can take my own lead in my own life and change things for me. And that's
exactly. And if I just sort of describe and say an administrative role, so yes, the traditional way is to become an administrative officer in a permanent position. But yet, if you really love Excel, or Word, you could become an Excel expert, and people will pay you decent money if you can prove that, especially with Excel, I've found like the formula is extremely difficult. But if you get the right person, they can make it a simple document, beautifully designed, beautifully functional, and it just works great. So you outsource that to another person on the platform. And
I would pay someone to set up an Excel sheet.
Yeah.
and I used to have a lady from Upwork who I think she was Australian. She used to do some of my bookkeeping records for tax every year, just all the money that used to come through PayPal. And she'd set it all up on the spreadsheet and everything. I mean, that would have taken me weeks. And she'd have it done in 2 hours, and, it'd be $50 or $60 or whatever. So there's definitely a demand out there for it.
Exactly. So that's what I mean. You could like try and apply for 20 odd jobs, but the other thing too is people are not getting any sort of feedback, so that can be quite demoralizing or quite negative for them if they say, oh, I've applied for 20 or 40 jobs this week and not really had many phone calls.
No feedback. It's difficult, and I think that's going to be the norm because people are getting inundated with hundreds and hundreds. I mean, it used to be maybe 100 applications. There'll be a lot more now, and they just can't physically answer them all. It would be nice if they would automate it, because it is nice even just to get a sorry no letter.
Sometimes it is.
But I think and you'd be able to help people just kind of move past that as well, because once again you've got to get your energy high and just go, okay, well, I've had all those no's, there's a yes coming.
And sometimes it's just explaining to the prospect or the person that needs the help about my process. So I'll just explain it briefly here.
Of course.
So when there's a job ad, I first of all look for the keywords, and I actually just get a bit of paper and say, okay, what are the keywords in this particular job ad? Because nowadays recruiters use this applicant tracking system, and you need these keywords in your resume and also in the cover letter to hopefully be in the first 20 applicants.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And then if you and then you also like measure your results. So if you get a couple of phone calls, I would sort of take that, I'm doing a good job, keep going, because it's just about refining what I'm saying to them over the phone. I know when I go for job interviews, I wait for number 4. Okay, so if I receive the first 3 phone calls, I normally stuff up. Okay, I answer the questions in the wrong way or give the wrong impression, even though that in my thinking, I'm like, oh, I could have answered that better. Sometimes because you're just on the go trying to sell yourself as best as possible. You are going to make mistakes. So I just say, okay, that was number 1. Okay, what can I learn from that? Okay, well, I can get that particular answer a lot better. And the same with face-to-face interviews. So these days, they're probably going more remote or Zoom videos. And I've never forgotten my first video. That was, there was 2 video people interviewing me in different states. So this was a sales position in Adelaide, and the head office recruiter lady was in Sydney. So I was in Adelaide. I had my manager in Adelaide, and then I had the recruiter lady as well on the same Zoom conversation, and we had a 3-way Zoom conversation interviewing me. And at that period of time, it was before all this outsourcing happened, it was very different experience.
Still just as nerve-wracking, isn't it? Still just as nerve-wracking as in person.
Yeah, because it's all new. You see yourself on the screen, you see them on the screen, but it just brings another, like you said, another perspective. So this conversation it's all about, I think, adapting and being open to different perspectives. I think that's probably what I take away from talking to you tonight.
Absolutely. And look, even just the interviews via Zoom requires a few finer details as well, because you've got to make sure that the background's good and you haven't got dogs screaming or dogs barking or children screaming or whatever. You have to clear the space, and so you'd be able to talk them through that as well. So it's been really fascinating, and I think you're definitely moving towards something that is going to be in demand, and you'll be able to not only help people move forward, but really help them get a new perspective on where they are now. And even if it's just to learn a few different things, and then perhaps do a course in something, it's takes them out of whatever pain they're in right now, doesn't it? And I think you've got a lot of compassion and empathy for people, and I think it's wonderful what you're doing. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us.
That's all right. It's been really great.
And so in the comments when we're finished, if you'd like to put the link in for the app.
Yes. Okay.
And your page, and so people can connect with you, and they can come along and get some help from you in whatever area they need in moving forward with their career.
Yes, so I've got a Facebook page called Your Career Position, so I'll put that in there, and then also some of the other platforms that we mentioned on this interview. So AirTasker, the Fiverr, Upwork, and of course this work app that I'm an ambassador for. So that's a Gold Coast founder, and it works in Australia and India. So it has about 50 or more, and he's advertising on the TV and radio at the moment for Gold Coast and Brisbane. So that is like a business directory at the moment, because people understand you can promote your business for free. But anyone on this call, that wants to utilize these free platforms, send me a message, and I'm happy to chat to you for say 15 or 20 minutes, really understanding how your particular business or your career could benefit from some of these platforms that I've mentioned.
Perfect. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kathryn. And
that's right.
And thank you everybody who's joined us here live and everybody who's on the replay. I hope you found that fascinating, and I look forward to seeing you all next week on TrishRockTV. Bye for now.
Okay, bye-bye.